shipping, aiding Hezbollah in its 7-month duel with Israel over their shared border, and pro-Iranian militia attacking Western bases in Iraq. And Iran has renewed its support for Hamas and is blamed by Israel for inspiring its October the 7th attacks. Far from mourning Raisi, if he has died, many at home and abroad will be relieved. But real power in Iran lies with this man. In his reign of terror and repression, Ebrahim Raisi was only doing the bidding of his master. If he is dead, Khamenei will replace him with someone capable of delivering the same policies, though his regime will hope to do so quickly and smoothly, afraid uncertainty could lead to instability and more unrest. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Now, it's been described as the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history. And after decades waiting for justice, later today, tens of thousands of people who were infected with contaminated blood in the 70s and 80s will at last hear the findings of a public inquiry into the scandal. The Chancellor is also expected to set out details of a new compensation package reported to be at least £10 billion. Our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter, has been speaking to victims and their families.
Today and tomorrow is all about you. Love you.
Peter is always with them at every stage of this long, gruelling fight. And now, the infected blood scandal is approaching its day of reckoning. Peter was their brother. He died in 2008.
The way I feel is that I don't think my brother can rest until we all rest. I'd rather have my brother. I would rather not have any money because he's gone. They've taken him through reckless, quick fix blood transfusions.
He served as a technician in the RAF, but it was a car crash that led him to need a blood transfusion in 1985. It was a decade later before he was told it was contaminated with hepatitis C.
I personally would like to see some prosecutions made from this if there are any people left, because as you know, this has been going on since the 1970s, and there are people that need to be held to account.
And so they joined the others wearing red in Parliament Square on the eve of the publication of the final report from this 6-year inquiry.
It feels like there's acknowledgement and recognition now, and we've come to a point where it's kind of the beginning of the end.
The government will formally respond once the inquiry has published its final report on Monday. But the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has already indicated that a full and fair compensation deal is on the way. And it has political consensus.
We'll back the Chancellor. I'm sure he's going to make the right decision this week, and he'll have our support in doing it. And if that's the only thing he does between now and the election, that's the right thing to do, the right priority.
Successive governments have failed the 30,000 people who received contaminated blood and their loved ones. People are still losing their lives because of what happened. Justice has been delayed and denied. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
And a reminder that we'll have full coverage of that report throughout the day here on Sky News, starting in breakfast from 6 o'clock. Sarah Jane Mee will then be presenting live from the inquiry from 10 a.m. Now, Britain is ready for a change of government. That's the verdict of one of the country's biggest and wealthiest business names, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Speaking exclusively to Sky News, the billionaire accused the Conservatives of failing to properly implement Brexit and said, in his opinion, that's the reason Labour could soon be in power. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
He's number 4 in the new Sunday Times rich list, worth £23.5 billion. But energy tycoon Sir Jim Ratcliffe has told Sky News it's time for a change of government, and Brexit hasn't worked.
The Conservatives have had they've had a good run, over the last, probably 15, 20 years, and I think most of the country probably feels it's time for a change, and I sort of get that, really.
Sir Jim backed Brexit, but now claims the Tories have failed to curb immigration.
The country was designed for 55 or 60 million people, and we've got 70 million people, and all the services break down as a consequence. So that's what Brexit was all about, and nobody's implemented that. They just keep talking about it, but nothing's been done, which is why I think we'll finish up with a change of government, to be honest.
Now part owner of Manchester United, Sir Jim says Sir Keir Starmer would do a good job running the country. But senior Conservatives reject Sir Jim's claim that failure to implement Brexit has resulted in higher immigration.
I actually think he's wrong. And for example, one of his complaints was on immigration, not recognising that a large amount of the immigration last year came from, for example, Ukrainians coming here. He's a businessman, as you say, part owner of United. He will have his own agenda going on, but I just fundamentally disagreed with what he said.
Some Labour MPs also question Sir Jim's views on immigration. A man who lives in Monaco and so doesn't pay as much tax as he would if he were here full-time, complains there aren't enough public services and blames immigrants. Interesting, observed the Labour MP Stella Creasy. Starmer supporters warmly welcome backing from big business, however.
The thing about the Labour Party is we're not a socialist party, we're a social democratic party. So we always believe you have to work with capitalism, you have to make capitalism fairer, you have to make it work more productively for workers. You need capitalism if you're going to have wealth to redistribute.
Already a winner in business, Sir Jim hopes to be a winner in sport and back a winner in politics. John Craig, Sky News.
Now, there have been celebrations at the Etihad as Manchester City won an historic fourth Premier League title in a row, beating West Ham 3-1 on the final day of the season. Pep Guardiola's team are now the first side to win 4 successive top-flight titles in the history of England's top division. Sky Sports correspondent Rob Harris was there.
This is English football history. Manchester City, champions of the land, 4 in a row.
They're used to this now, but still setting new standards for supremacy. Never before has a Premier League team done this. 4 titles in a row for Manchester City. Making history. On a final day when Arsenal couldn't overcome the weight of history. A 20-year drought, and the wait goes on. Their only hope was City losing to West Ham. Hopes dashed inside 80 seconds by Phil Foden. And a sweet second showing why he's player of the season. Knocking City off the summit seemed even harder after this. Everton in front at Arsenal. Then came a glimmer of hope at the Etihad. City's lead halved spectacularly by West Ham. But just leading was enough for Pep Guardiola's side. And the 2-goal cushion was restored after an hour. No wonder Arsenal didn't celebrate their winner. The partying was all in Manchester. A 3-1 win over West Ham. The trophy City's to keep for another year at least.
I think now we put ourselves in history books. No team's ever done it, and yeah, just you see what it means to the fans and it means to us.
No one has done it. Why not? But always we for experience in these years, when we think about the titles, when you arrive 2 months left. So in November, December is not a good wait because it's so far away.
The scale of this success was once unimaginable for these fans. Not even their great rivals across Manchester at United achieved 4 titles in a row under Sir Alex Ferguson. This has been formidable from City. They dismissed the detractors. And you wouldn't count on a 5th in a row in a year. Now it's on to Wembley, hoping this season ends with a double by winning the Manchester Derby FA Cup final. Rob Harris, Sky News, Manchester.
Now, as the popularity of vinyl continues to grow, industry leaders are meeting to discuss how to make it more eco-friendly. Records are usually made from PVC, which isn't great for the planet. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
She helped fuel the highest weekly vinyl sales in 30 years. Taylor Swift's new album coming in various colours, for fans, something to covet. But is our rediscovered love of the record environmentally reckless?
The bigger you are as an artist, the more influence you have the more you can push things forward.
Step Forward award-winning rockers enter Shikari, who now insist all their records are made using something called bio-vinyl.
Traditional vinyl is a petroleum-based product, an oil-based product. No one really wants to support the extraction of any more fossil fuels.
Rather than regular PVC pellets, which all records start out as, it's possible to use ones made from renewable sources like cooking oil or wood pulp. Key voices within vinyl production want the music industry to listen.
It's a bit more expensive to manufacture, but if enough people manufacture with it, then the price point will come down.
Ultimately, everything works from retail back, and with retail prices already being quite high on vinyl, it's very hard for people to have the extra money.
While few labels seem willing to shoulder the cost of switching, vinyl, a big old hunk of plastic, might feel like the least green option.
But are we getting ourselves in a spin when we should also be looking in another direction?
If you take global vinyl sales for last year, about 80 million, that works out at producing around 156,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions. Compare that to streaming, with Spotify alone responsible for about a third of the market. Its own estimates for global carbon emissions were 280,000 tonnes last year, using vast amounts of electricity to power its data storage servers. In theory, products like bio-vinyl have the potential to reduce CO2 emissions by up to 90%. Time, perhaps, for the music industry to take note. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
On to some of the morning's other news now, and in Taiwan, a ceremony is underway for the inauguration of their new president, Lai Ching-te. Lai, who won the election in January, is taking over from the current leader after serving as vice president for the past 4 years. This marks a third consecutive presidential term for the Democratic Progressive Party in Taiwan. Sean Diddy Combs has admitted he beat his ex-girlfriend and has issued a video apology saying his actions were inexcusable and said he was truly sorry. The music mogul's admission came after CCTV footage emerged appearing to show the American rapper assaulting the singer Cassie Ventura in a hotel in 2016. He'd previously denied all allegations of abuse. And take a look at this. A bright comet fragment has illuminated the night sky over Spain and Portugal in a stunning display which some spectators said felt like a movie. The European Space Agency said the small piece of comet was flying at a speed of 28 miles per second before burning up over the Atlantic. Still to come here on Sky News, Liverpool say their goodbyes to one of their greatest ever managers.
Do you know what kind of pollen gets up your nose? Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
The weather stays fairly settled over the next day or so before low pressure moves in from the near continent. Despite low clouds spreading inland overnight, this will burn away throughout the morning to leave another fine day with plenty of warm sunshine. Temperatures will reach 22 Celsius, that's 72 Fahrenheit.
Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
Yeah, so what Ripple enables people to do is we enable thousands of people to come together and collectively own large wind farms and solar parks. So instead of having to have rooftop solar on your home, you can own a tiny credit card slice of a big wind turbine and get your power through that via the grid. We enable thousands of people to come together and collectively own large wind farms and solar parks. So instead of having to have rooftop solar on your home, you can own a tiny credit card slice of a big wind turbine and get your power through that via the grid. So people really want to act on climate change and be part of a real solution. So if you own a bit of a wind turbine, you can see it, you can touch it, you know you're having a real, genuine impact on climate change, not just this year, but for the next 25 or 30 years. So people really want to be part of this change. And these are fantastic things to own because they enable you to reduce your carbon emissions for the long term. So we've seen that, we need to have more capital into the industry. And by enabling consumers to own these assets, this project, Kirkhill, was it raised £13 million from those consumers to build it. So, consumers can be a fantastic source of capital to grow this industry. We need loads more turbines in the UK, both onshore and offshore. We think it can really change the game in terms of local consenting, because if people can see that they can own this wind farm that's being proposed near them, it means that they've got a real genuine stake in it. It's going to reduce their electricity bills and it's going to enable them to reduce their carbon impact as well. So we think it can really help change the whole debate in terms of local consenting.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
Welcome back. Now, just 1 year after opening, a groundbreaking cancer research project launched in memory of the Girls Aloud singer Sarah Harding is successfully identifying young women at increased risk of breast cancer. Sarah died in 2021 at the age of 39. Her dying wish was to find new ways of spotting signs of the disease earlier. Our North of England correspondent Charlotte Leeming reports.
Sarah Harding was a much-loved member of Girls Aloud who found fame in the early noughties. After being diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, she died in 2021 at the age of just 39. Her final wish was to find new ways to spot the signs of the disease early on.
This woman has about 4 times the risk of breast cancer compared to that woman on the left.
The singer had treatment at the Christie Hospital in Manchester with consultant Dr. Sasha Howell. He's now leading a research project set up in her name, which a year in is already having a positive impact.
We want to identify those women who are at increased risk so we can start screening them, identify the cancers earlier, where the treatment is much more likely to be successful.
Every year in the UK, more than 2,000 women under 40 are diagnosed with breast cancer. It's the most common cause of death in women aged between 30 to 55. But there's no routine screening for women under 50 who don't have a family history of the disease. It's hoped this research will change that. 39-year-old Anna Housley is one of hundreds of women taking part in the trial. The mother of 2 was shocked when a scan and genetic testing showed she had an increased risk of developing breast cancer.
It did come as a bit of a shock, but thinking back on it now, I'm really grateful that I did enter the study, and I'm really grateful that I have been found, because now I know that that risk is there, and now I know that I'm going to be looked after and I can be screened, and should it ever develop, fingers crossed it won't, but should it ever develop into breast cancer when I'm a little bit older, I know my chances now of being picked up early and being treatable are far higher than they might otherwise have been.
If the trial in Greater Manchester is successful, it could then be rolled out across the UK, meaning when women reach the age of 30, they'll be able to have a risk assessment, even if the disease doesn't run in their family.
It was Sarah's last wish, wasn't it, to help younger women? She would have been pleased, wouldn't she, with what you've done so far?
I think she'd be absolutely thrilled that she was part of this, and that her legacy is that we will be helping more and more young women like her who unfortunately develop breast cancer in their 30s.
And Anna is certainly grateful for Sarah Harding's last wish to help more young women spot the disease earlier and save more lives in the future. Charlotte Leeming, Sky News, Manchester.
OK, let's take a look now at the day's sports news with Jasper.
Goal! I've spotted an opportunity, found the space and slotted it home. It's what I do. This sports bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Hi there. As we've seen, Manchester City have been crowned Premier League champions for the 4th season in a row after beating West Ham 3-1. Elsewhere, it was a winning end to Jurgen Klopp's time in charge of Liverpool, with his side beating Wolves 2-0. Klopp departs after 8.5 years, having won every major trophy possible at the club. He was greeted with a raucous reception by the Anfield crowd. Liverpool got the party started when Alexis McAllister headed in. Jarell Quansah got the final goal of the Jurgen Klopp era and what was Klopp's 299th win at the club. Then it was time for Klopp to get a proper send-off from the Liverpool fans. He was afforded a guard of honour from players and staff before it was time for one final fist-pump celebration to the Kop. Tottenham secured 5th spot and a Europa League place for next season with a 3-0 win over Sheffield United. 2 goals from Dejan Kulusevski and 1 from Pedro Porro gave Spurs the win. It was Sheffield United's 28th loss this season as they return to the Championship. Chelsea have also secured European football after finishing 6th. Moises Caicedo with this stunning strike from the halfway line to start the scoring in a 2-1 win over Bournemouth. They won't know if they'll appear in the Europa or Europa Conference League next season until after the FA Cup final next weekend. It will also be a nervy wait for Newcastle. They finished 7th after a 4-2 win over Brentford. They'll only get a Europa Conference League place if Manchester City beat Manchester United in next week's FA Cup final. So Manchester United miss out on qualifying for Europe via their league position after finishing 8th, despite beating Brighton 2-0. But United will qualify for the Europa League if they win the FA Cup. That scenario would see Chelsea get the Europa Conference League spot and would mean Newcastle miss out on European football. Chris Wood's 2 goals against former club Burnley sealed Premier League safety for Nottingham Forest. They ran out 2-1 winners at Turf Moor. Burnley's fate already decided before the game. They returned to the Championship and won just 2 games at home all season. Raul Jimenez scored twice as Fulham beat Luton 4-2 at Kenilworth Road. Adama Traore and Harry Wilson grabbed the other Fulham goals. A Carlton Morris penalty and Alfie Doughty free kick gave Luton their goals. Jean-Philippe Mateta scored a hat-trick as Crystal Palace thrashed Aston Villa 5-0 to finish 10th and equal their best finish in the Premier League. Richie Eze scored the other 2 goals. Palace end the season with an unbeaten run of 7 games. Villa had already secured 4th spot in Champions League football for next season. And Red Bull's Max Verstappen held off a late charge from McLaren's Lando Norris to win the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Verstappen did struggle with his tyres in the latter part of the race, but it didn't matter in the end. He took his 5th victory in 7 races this year to further his grip on a 4th world title. Norris a close 2nd, Ferrari's Charles Leclerc 3rd. Plenty more reaction to Man City being crowned Premier League champions once again over on Sky Sports News. We're back later on.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. Anyone got gloves in my size? I need 4.
Now let's see how the weather is looking. Well, it will become more unsettled from Tuesday onwards, but for now, a ridge of high pressure dominates, keeping conditions fairly settled, but also cooler in the east with an onshore flow. It'll be a largely dry night for all. Central and eastern parts will see low clouds spreading inland from the North Sea. Clearer skies in the west will allow temperatures to fall back to low single figures in rural spots. After sunrise, the low cloud will begin to burn back to coastal areas. By the middle of the day, there will be widespread sunshine over Ireland, England and much of Wales. Cloud will be slow to clear over North Wales, northern England and central southern Scotland. And eastern Scotland will be much brighter after a couple of gloomy days. Do stay with us here on Sky News. Coming up, we'll be taking another look at the morning's papers in our press preview. This is Sky News, our top stories. A major search and rescue operation is underway in the mountains of northwest Iran after a helicopter carrying the Iranian president and his foreign minister has apparently crashed. After decades waiting for justice, today tens of thousands of people who were infected with contaminated blood in the 70s and 80s will finally hear the findings of a public inquiry into the scandal. And one of Britain's wealthiest businessmen, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, says he believes the country is ready for a change of government. OK, time now for a look at today's newspapers with Gillian Joseph.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. First look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with barrister and former government minister Anna Soubry and John Stevens, political editor at the Daily Mirror. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Guardian leads with the desperate search for the Iranian president after his helicopter crashed earlier today. The Express highlights the long wait for justice for victims of the infected blood scandal, with the final report set to be published tomorrow. The Mirror adds that the inquiry report will shock the nation and shame ministers for failing victims. And the Telegraph leads with the Prime Minister's impending apology to those given infected blood by the NHS. The Eye reports on an artificial intelligence trial to improve the speed and accuracy of breast cancer detection in the UK, which Rishi Sunak says could save millions of women. The Times reports that the Labour Party will make it easier to change gender under plans to simplify the process if they win the general election. According to the Financial Times, G7 leaders are considering whether to rush through tens of billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine before the next US presidential election. The Metro reports on star chef Heston Blumenthal revealing that he's been diagnosed as bipolar. The Daily Star forecasts that we could see the hottest May in 150 years later this week. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined again by Anna Soubry and John Stevens. Welcome back. Let's start with the Telegraph front page and the inquiry. You're going to hear from the inquiry into the blood infection scandal tomorrow. Rishi Sunak also will deliver an apology to those concerned, their families and the victims, John.
Yeah, I think this is going to be quite a big day tomorrow, and it is right that these thousands of people who've been affected by this scandal, both people who were infected with these contaminated blood products themselves or people who've lost loved ones because of this, will finally get some of the answers about why this happened. But the big question will be, what does the government do next? So we'll have Rishi Sunak make this statement in the Commons tomorrow, where he issued this apology on behalf of the government. And obviously, this was happening in the 70s, 80s and 90s. It was a long time before Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. And there have been concerns about the cover-up and whether people weren't telling the truth about what exactly had happened in the subsequent years. But the thing that Rishi Sunak is responsible for is making sure that these people do finally get some proper compensation. One of the things in this Telegraph story it's talking about is how people haven't received compensation so far. So the inquiry recommended that people who were orphaned children who lost their mums or dads because of this, that they should get interim payments while waiting for the inquiry to finish. That didn't happen. They've not received a single penny. And so I think the concern will be that, yeah, the government will say the right things, we'll have the apology, and they'll say, yes, we will pay the compensation, which will be possibly billions and billions of pounds. But the worry will be that it will take quite a bit of time to get this set up and running. And one of the statistics in the paper is that every 4 days, someone who's affected by this is dying before justice has happened. And we know that the government can drag their feet on things like this. We've been talking about the Post Office inquiry. Alan Bates still hasn't got his compensation, still hasn't come to a deal. And you think the post office story is something that captured everyone's imagination because of that ITV drama that was on over Christmas time. Alan Bates was obviously the main character in their drama. You think they still haven't managed to get an agreement with Alan Bates on what compensation he should receive. Are they stupid? Like, do you just not understand the media and the world we're in? That it just seems incredible that they still haven't moved on that. And so the worry will be on this one, are they going to move quick enough?
Just to say that interim payments of £100,000 have so far been paid to about 4,000 infected people and the spouses of deceased infected individuals. But as you say, no compensation for bereaved parents or orphaned children. But the sum that we're talking about, or certainly has been reported or leaked, is £10 billion. That's what the government will set out for compensation, we're hearing tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good piece by The Telegraph because it goes into the depths of this scandal. So, I mean, I was Public Health Minister in 2012. I met a number of the families, and they were angry, very, very serious. I mean, an anger which sort of I personally thought was completely justified. But this is a long-running scandal, and one of the things that is in the Telegraph's piece is a quote from Sarah Doricott, whose father died of liver cancer in 2015 after he got hepatitis C, through infected blood. And the point that she and many others are saying, well, just saying sorry isn't enough. Actually, just paying compensation isn't enough. I actually don't know what you can do to wrong this terrible, terrible right for the families, for what they've had to go through. Because, as John says, it's decades. And on so many levels, there's so much failure. So, I mean, I'm one of those ministers that failed, absolutely failed, having listened to all of this, to take up the cudgels and champion it and all the rest of it. And I'm not trying to make excuses, but my Secretary of State was Jeremy Hunt. Even he found it very difficult to take up the cudgels. I think Andy Burnham had been a Secretary of State, obviously the Labour Mayor now of Greater Manchester. And there was a wall of, not silence, but there was a wall that said, no, we will not have a public inquiry. No, nothing has ever been done that was wrong. We didn't know about it. As soon as we did, we stopped it. I think this inquiry is going to blow the lid off that. And I think it speaks again about when people they know mistakes have been made and they close ranks. And you may say it's a human instinct to do it in whatever walk of life it may be. But when it comes to people's health and people have died, you don't close ranks. You have to be honest from the outset. So I think, God willing, this is the last of the great scandals, but it's seriously dreadful. And you just, when you read this piece, and there are other pieces in the Mirror and so on, talking about the compensation, but also talking about, it sounds ghastly, some commission to look at the setting of the tariffs, and you just have that sinking feeling, don't you? That there'll be lots of warm words, promises for 10 billion, and then you'll be lucky if you get very much after God knows how many years. That's the big fear in all of it now.
Well, the hope is that perhaps some timescale might be set. Maybe that might be.
No, I think you'd get lawyers in that, like they do in any other case, involving negligence, or just looking at what we call the quantum. What's the amount of damages? Just pay them the money. 10 billion is an awful lot of money. Pay them the money. Don't mess about on it any longer.
Right, well, we'll be covering the inquiry's findings tomorrow, all day from 10 a.m. live. Let's have a look at The Guardian, the story we've been running our lead all evening, this developing story, the missing Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, whose helicopter has come down in an accident in very difficult weather conditions, and the search and rescue operation is continuing.
Yeah, there's still loads of unanswered questions in this, but two things we do know are that, number one, the weather was absolutely atrocious, and I think that is part of the reason why we haven't found out answers, because they're finding it difficult to be able to get there, because they obviously can't fly a helicopter in those conditions again. And so the conditions were terrible to be in a helicopter. The second thing we know is that aircraft in Iran aren't particularly great. That's because of sanctions, that they're unable to buy new equipment. And so they've had loads of these helicopter crashes, plane crashes with other people who've met a similar fate. And so even though whenever there's something like this, you start to hear conspiracy theories and people start to think, oh, was this to do with, is this some agency who's done this on behalf of another government, or is it someone within the country who's targeted one of their rivals? But in this case, so far, from what we know, it looks possible that it was just a helicopter crash.
Obviously, we don't know. It's still a search and rescue operation. But Anna, if it is the final conclusion that he has lost his life, what implications do you think it will have for the region, bearing in mind the fact that Iran is kind of a nexus to lots of wars and
absolutely, and they're behind
conflict.
all sorts of terrorist organisations and so on. I don't think it looks like it would have any profound impact at all. The show will go on because it's not one of those, you know, he's not leading a faction against somebody else where you can say, oh, well, now that person's gone, that means this faction will win over. It's not like that. It is, the loss of any human life is always a tragedy, whatever one's views of people are politically. And it looks like that is what this is, and the regime will continue. And they've said as much as well, haven't they, this evening? That it's
yes, the Supreme Leader has said that the management of the country will continue.
And the Supreme Leader is the Supreme Leader. So I don't think there seems to be much concern about any.
But we'll keep across that developing story. As I say, the search and rescue operation continues tonight in that atrocious weather. John, take us into the story in The Guardian about tuition fees.
Yeah, so this is concerns that universities don't have enough money, that there's going to have to be fees would have to be put up. So at the moment, I think the maximum universities are able to charge in England is £9,250 a year. This is suggesting that vice-chancellors of universities are saying that they think that it might have to go up by between £2,000 and £3,500 a year. And obviously universities need to be properly funded to give students a proper experience and do research and all the things that they do. The thing that worries me is this will put off students from poorer backgrounds from going to university, that even though you don't have to pay the fees up front and you only start paying them back when you're earning over a certain amount, the idea that you just go into this massive debt is going to put people off going to uni. And if you're one of these people who've not come from a background with loads of money, then you might not, you can just think, well, I'm just not going to bet on myself by doing this, that yeah, is it worth me spending all this money? And I think if they do this, it needs to come with extra help for poor students. So whether that's bringing back proper maintenance grants or, you know, looking again at interest rates, because the interest rates that students now pay on university fees are like properly high. So when it's not that long that I was at university, but the fees were much lower and the interest rate you paid was tiny. You know, it did go up every year, how much you owed, but it wasn't much. But now, because the interest rates, I can't remember whether it's RPI or CPI, they track, but they're properly getting charged proper interest rates. And so I think if you put this on top of that, then it's going to have a real negative impact.
Anna, do you think that's right, that this will put, if there is any increase, that this will put
I didn't think that was the evidence, actually, was that students from less prosperous backgrounds were going in. I mean, I don't know what the stats are, but I didn't think it was particularly a problem. I think there's a much bigger problem, which is, if this is right, that you now have some former university ministers, like some big heavyweights. David Willits, according to The Guardian, he was a Conservative, he's now in the Lords. Alan Johnson, Peter Mandelson, big hitters, saying there's a crisis brewing. And in many ways, that doesn't surprise a lot of us with universities near to us. I mean, I live near Loughborough, there's Nottingham up the road, there's Derby, Lincoln, blah, blah. And I know, and Leicester down the road. And I know that a lot of universities have invested a lot of money in new buildings in our city centres. And our student populations mean a great deal to those cities and the prosperity and the future of those cities. So any shrinking of the sector, which is another danger if you're not putting up fees, that's going to have huge implications. It's not simply about students not being able to go to university, it's the implications. In Nottingham, the biggest employers in Nottingham are Nottingham Trent and Nottingham University. So that shows you the power and the importance in the wider economy of our universities.
But they're saying, well, we hear from them that they might have to put up the fees because they need more money to run.
Absolutely.
Anyway, we must leave it there and take a break. Anna and John for the minute, thank you. Coming up, could prison sentences under a year be scrapped? We'll be discussing that story. It's in tomorrow's Telegraph. Do stay with us.
And I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
They're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview where I'm joined by barrister and former government minister Anna Soubry and John Stevens, political editor at the Daily Mirror. So let's take you through the newspapers now. So we're going to have a look at this section. We're going to have a look at the Telegraph, first of all, which is a very interesting story. And Anna, you will definitely have a view on this. Up to 23,000 criminals will escape jail under plans by the government to scrap prison sentences of less than a year for most offenders.
Yes. It's all baloney, this. So seriously, it's absolutely...
I told you should have a view.
You used a different word out there, but...
I'm being very well behaved. Look, I work as a criminal barrister, so I'm in court. In fact, I'm in court tomorrow, but we won't go into that. It's another story. And it says here, so I know what's, if I may say, I know what's going on in our courts, and the criminal justice system is on the absolute verge of crisis, of complete collapse, and our prisons are bursting. So the government's come up with something which is, this has come up before, which is, well, let's abolish short prison sentences. Now, I understand, obviously, if you get a 12-month prison sentence, you will only serve half anyway, and you'll get subject, usually, to the early release scheme. So you're doing a couple of months, and that seems like a complete waste of time, because you can do absolutely, not an awful lot with somebody in that short period of time. But there are certain instances, and judges know that, trust our judges. They really do know how to do sentencing, and with very few exceptions, they make the right decisions. And there are times when you have to pass a 12-month under 12-month custodial sentence for all sorts of extremely good reasons. And the reason I'm getting so agitated about this is that when you read it, and you can read this better than me because your eyes are better than mine.
It's big up there, Anna.
But what it... I can't see. But look what it says there. It says there will be a presumption, a new legal presumption that offenders facing jail terms of under 12 months should instead be punished in the community. What that means is, actually, we know that this is a load of old cack. We know it's not going to work. We are going to trust our judges. And so this presumption in reality will mean that there will still be those short sentences as and when you need them. And that is the point. Judges send people to prison when there is genuinely a very good reason to send somebody to prison, even if it's for a short period of time.
John, do you suspect that this is being driven by the lack of prison spaces rather than, a change to how justice is administered?
Oh, it's definitely been driven by the lack of prison places.
Christ.
I mean, they are desperately trying to come up with any idea, how do you create more space? So talked about renting prison cells in foreign countries. You've obviously had the early release scheme where they're letting people out before they would have got out otherwise. And on that bit, I think that we haven't really known the impact that's had yet, because the government's not been publishing figures on the number of prisoners that have been let out early. They will have to do so at some point. They've also not been clear about what crimes have these people committed. Who exactly are these people that are being released early? There was the Chief Inspector of Prisons had a report out, I think it was last week, about a prison. And in that one, he mentioned about how this guy who was a domestic abuser, who they thought was a risk to children, had been let out early, and he was raising concerns about that.
They will be.
But we just don't know who else has been out there. And I think that if the public, this is a small story on the front page of the Telegraph. It has been in newspapers.
For the public, isn't it?
I think if the public knew the true extent of what was going on, this would be front page stories.
It should be, because the prisons are in crisis in any event. They are absolutely rammed. And when I only defend, so I don't prosecute. So almost every day, I'm representing people, usually who are in prison. And the stories that they will tell me about the atrocious conditions where drugs are absolutely rife throughout prison, and people are then trying to take their lives. There's all sorts of outbreaks of violence going on, not just against people who are looking after them, but against the prisoners. And the idea that somebody's going to be rehabilitated in some way, or even actually properly punished in any way, in these sorts of conditions, and I can't tell you how bad it is. And I know at least one Crown Court where they have stopped all their what we call bail trials. So imagine, there's a backlog. Imagine you've been waiting years, and that's what's happening. Years for your trial, or you're a victim. If you're on bail in that particular Crown Court, you will not have your trial for another year.
This is a chosen subject, clearly. Anna and John, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. Good to see you.
OK, let's take a look then at the weather. And it will become more unsettled from Tuesday onwards. But for now, a ridge of high pressure dominates, keeping conditions fairly settled, but also cooler in the east with an onshore flow. It'll be a largely dry night for all. Central and eastern parts will see low cloud spreading inland from the North Sea. Clearer skies in the west will allow those temperatures to fall back to low single figures in rural spots. After sunrise, the low cloud will begin to burn back to coastal areas. By the middle of the day, there'll be widespread sunshine over Ireland, England and much of Wales. Cloud will be slow to clear over North Wales, northern England and central southern Scotland. Eastern Scotland will be much brighter after a couple of gloomy days. There's an outside chance of seeing a sharp shower through the afternoon, most likely in the south and west, but most will miss them. Temperatures will top out at 22 Celsius, that's 72 Fahrenheit, a little lower than Sunday, and it will be cooler along eastern coasts.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock. On today's show, Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi has died in a helicopter crash. We'll have reaction from the Middle East.
Plus, the biggest disaster in the history of the NHS. Victims of the infected blood scandal will finally get answers today.
All that to come. It's Monday, the 20th of May. Iran's president was travelling back from a visit to the border with Azerbaijan when his helicopter crashed, killing everybody on board. The official report into the infected blood scandal will be delivered just after midday today as victims seek answers to a preventable tragedy. Taiwan's new president calls on China to stop threatening the island. And champions yet again, Manchester City win the Premier League title for the fourth year in a row. It's Monday morning, it's 6 a.m. Gareth Barlow with you on Sky News. A very good morning to you. Iran's president and foreign minister have been killed in a helicopter crash along with everybody else on board. The aircraft was an American-made Bell 212 helicopter. The aircraft went down in heavy fog in Iran's East Azerbaijan province. Search teams located the crash site in a mountainous area in the early hours of Monday morning. Well, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who joins us now. What more do we know? What are the authorities saying?
Well, the signs were not good from the start. The initial reports were of a hard landing, and it was in mountainous area, and the weather conditions were atrocious. By the time night fell last night and the temperatures dropped dramatically, no contact had been made with the helicopter or anybody on board. And then, just after first light this morning, they found the wreckage of the helicopter and no signs of life. And with it, in the last hour, confirmation that all on board had died. At first light this morning in Iran's Zagros mountain range, the rescue teams found what they had been searching all night for. This is the tale of President Ebrahim Raisi's helicopter. There were no signs of life there. 12 hours after reports that the aircraft had gone down, the wreckage was finally tracked down by drone. The mission was hampered by heavy fog and rain. Iranian state media has initially blamed the bad weather for the crash. President Raisi and his foreign minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian were returning from a trip to Iran's border with Azerbaijan in an American-made Bell 212 helicopter. These pictures, taken just hours before the crash, show the pair flying over a dam project that they inaugurated in northwest Iran. And this is the last known image of the aircraft they were travelling on. It was taken as they took off. Initially, it was reported by state media that the helicopter had come down in a hard landing. The language was later changed to crash. Search teams scrambled to the area, but wading through fog and forest was a challenge. The area is very mountainous. In places, the forests are impassable by vehicle. Earlier, President Raisi had met with his counterpart from Azerbaijan, touring the walls of the newly constructed dam in the border regions. The conditions then appeared to be good as they talked under clear skies. There are reports that the weather changed quickly after takeoff.
Over the past few weeks, Iran has experienced a lot of the weather conditions here have been different from previous years. We've had a lot more rain and snow throughout the country.
Ebrahim Raisi was elected 3 years ago, an ultra-conservative within the hardline authoritarian clerical regime. The second most powerful person in Iran, answering directly to Ayatollah Khamenei. The supreme leader quickly appeared on television last night to reassure the Iranian nation.
People must be assured that there will be no disturbances in the country's affairs.
But this is a delicate moment for Iran. Despite the promises of calm by the regime, there will be great uncertainty in the days ahead. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News. Well, the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has told the country not to worry, that there would be a plan in place for the succession of governance, and there are parts of the constitution that ensure that. The Vice President, Mohammad Mokhtaba, will be the new president on an interim basis at least, and elections should be held within 50 days. There will, of course, be a long period of mourning in Iran as well for Raisi and the others who died on board. Raisi, as I said in my report, is a hardliner, an ultra-conservative. Many will mourn his passing, many won't. There are a sizable number of Iranians who opposed him and will, to put it bluntly, celebrate his death. But his death does not mean that Iran and its regime will go from being ultra-conservative to being more moderate. It's highly likely that whoever eventually does succeed him as president will be chosen by the Supreme Leader and will be another ultra-conservative hardliner.
Alistair, for the moment, thank you so much. I'll have plenty more on that story throughout the course of the morning, of course. Now, the Infected Blood Inquiry set to publish its report today on one of the biggest scandals in NHS history. Tens of thousands of people were infected with contaminated blood through tainted blood products or blood transfusions, largely between the 1970s and 1980s. Sky's health correspondent Ashish Joshi has this report.
Every morning I do wake up and there is a small part of me that thinks, is today the day that I'm going to be diagnosed with some form of cancer.
This is the mental anguish of living with hepatitis C. Susan was born with von Willebrand disease. As a child, her blood clotting disorder was treated with a product called Factor VIII. It was supposed to revolutionize haemophiliac treatment. But instead, the American product, farmed from prisoners and drug addicts, was infected with HIV and hepatitis. The risks were known. Susan's father raised concerns.
He went into the consulting room and spoke to my consultant and said, very worried about this, and I want you to let me know if Susan has or will receive any American blood products. And he said to my father, absolutely not.
Why do you think you were lied to?
I think, unfortunately, it always comes down to cost implications.
At 14, Susan discovered she was among the thousands who had been infected in the worst treatment scandal in the NHS's history.
It's been a really, really difficult time for us as a family, and it's intergenerational. So because we were given these products to take home, my parents were taught how to inject. My mother has a huge feeling of guilt surrounding that.
The 40-year-long search for the truth for the infected and affected has finally led here, Westminster's Methodist Central Hall. Just after midday, Sir Brian Langstaff will deliver his report into the infected blood scandal, and it is expected to be damning. The significance of today simply can't be overstated. Later this morning, this great hall will be full of people infected with deadly diseases during secret trials, full of bereaved parents who were forced to watch their children die, and everyone else impacted by this scandal. The atmosphere will be charged with emotion, anger, and hopefully relief. These people have been lied to and ignored for over 40 years, but today, finally, they will have their day. Lawyers representing some of those impacted say Sir Brian is likely to hold many people responsible.
I don't think we're going to get the finger pointed at one person saying you are responsible for the whole thing, because there are so many people involved in it, and they're all making individual decisions.
The delay in delivering justice has compounded the grief and anguish felt by so many. But now, finally, they hope today will mark the beginning of the end of this shameful scandal. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell joins us now. And Rob, this inquiry has been decades in the making. Once it's published, what should we expect from the government?
So how the government is viewing and treating today is as a day for the victims, for the families, for those directly impacted by this scandal. So I don't think they'll be wanting to be seen to be sort of putting so much out that it kind of dominates or detracts from that. That said, I think given the severity and the scale of this, we will likely hear an apology. I think that will highly likely probably come from the Prime Minister as well. It may mean, though, that we have to wait until later in the week, maybe tomorrow, until we get the detail of the practical steps, the things that go beyond words. And at the centre of that, I think, will be the question of compensation. There have already been some interim payments made, but the full package hasn't materialised yet. Now, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, gave an interview to the Sunday Times yesterday, in which he spoke about a promise he made a decade ago while he was Health Secretary to a constituent who had been infected with hepatitis C as part of this scandal. He said he promised that he would bring forward a compensation package, and he says as Chancellor now he will make good on that. The question will be about the scale of it. There's been some reporting that it will amount to billions of pounds, potentially as much as 10 billion. That will take a slice out of what the government has to spend in an election year. That's money you can't spend on other things like tax cuts. But I think there is consensus within the government, within the Conservative Party and cross-party within Labour as well, that now is the time for action.
We'll follow all those developments closely. More details as well to come on Sky News. Of course, Rob, thank you. 7:15, actually, Kay will be joined by John Glenn, Paymaster General, and at 8:15, Labour's Sarah Jones will join us in the studio. Let's bring you up to speed on some of the day's other stories now. We'll start in Taiwan, where the new president, Lai Ching-te, has been officially sworn in at a ceremony in the capital, Taipei. Lai, who won the election in January, is taking over from the current leader after serving as vice president for the past 4 years. Well, let's bring in now Nicole Johnston, who stands by for us from Beijing. Nicole, how will this new leader in Taiwan change the game between the two countries?
Well, first of all, domestically, we're not expecting there to be any major change because the new president, who's also called William Lai, is from the same party as the previous president. So we expect that on foreign policy and on defence, he will keep things pretty much the same, trying to maintain the status quo. The reason that this is being so closely watched in Asia, though, was to listen in on his inauguration speech and to find out how, if there's any clue or sign, he's going to deal with this very difficult and tense relationship with China. On that front, he mentioned the word democracy more than 30 times. He talked about sovereignty. He said that Taiwan is as important to the world as it is to the Taiwanese people, really trying to set the stage there about how geopolitically strategic Taiwan is. He also called on China to stop threatening Taiwan, and he asked for there to be peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. Now, we're not expecting any big reaction from China. I would expect that they'll be trying to let this day pass and not for it to really register on the radar here in China. Having said that, though, we have had a number of Chinese vessels and aircraft operate close to Taiwan today. That is not unusual, though. That is part of what analysts call the grey zone warfare that we see in this region that has ratcheted up the tensions so far. Not enough to tip it into war, but enough for there to constantly be this sense of unease and being on edge here in East Asia.
Nicole, thank you so much. In the United States, 11 people have been injured in a mass shooting in the city of Savannah in the state of Georgia. An argument between two women led to the gunfight breaking out in a busy tourist area late on Saturday night. It follows 4 separate shootings in the city since Friday. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the killing of 3 Spanish tourists after gunmen opened fire in Afghanistan's central Bamiyan province. An Afghan person was also killed and a further 4 foreign nationals and 3 Afghans were injured in the attack in the mountainous region, the Taliban's Interior Ministry has said. It's also reported that 4 people have been arrested in connection with the shooting on Friday. Scientists say they've made a potentially game-changing breakthrough in breast cancer research after discovering how to preserve breast tissue outside the body. The study, which was funded by the Prevent Breast Cancer charity, found tissue could be preserved in a special gel solution for at least a week, which can help scientists identify the most effective drug treatments for patients. Meanwhile, in sport, Man City lifted the Premier League trophy for a record-breaking 4th season in a row. Pep Guardiola's team beat West Ham 3-1 on the final day of the season on Sunday at the Etihad Stadium. From Manchester, Rob Harris has this report.
This is English football history. Manchester City, champions of the land, 4 in a row.
They're used to this now, but still setting new standards for supremacy. Never before has a Premier League team done this. 4 titles in a row for Manchester City. Making history. On a final day when Arsenal couldn't overcome the weight of history. A 20-year drought, and the wait goes on. Their only hope was City losing to West Ham. Hopes dashed inside 80 seconds by Phil Foden. And a sweet second, showing why he's player of the season. Knocking City off the summit seemed even harder after this. Everton in front at Arsenal, even equalising not enough though. Then came a glimmer of hope at the Etihad. City's lead halved spectacularly by West Ham. But just leading was enough for Pep Guardiola's side. And the 2-goal cushion was restored after an hour. No wonder Arsenal didn't celebrate their winner. The partying was all in Manchester. A 3-1 win over West Ham. The trophy City's to keep for another year at least.
I think now we've put ourselves in the history books. No team's ever done it, and yeah, just you see what it means to the fans and it means to us.
No one has done it. Why not? But always we for experience in these years, when we think about the titles, when you arrive 2 months left. So in November, December is not a good wait because it's so far away.
The scale of this success was once unimaginable for these fans. Not even their great rivals across Manchester at United achieved 4 titles in a row under Sir Alex Ferguson. This has been formidable from City. They dismissed the detractors. And you wouldn't count on a 5th in a row in a year. Now it's on to Wembley, hoping this season ends with a double by winning the Manchester Derby FA Cup final. Rob Harris, Sky News, Manchester.
Well, the sun's certainly shining over the Etihad. What about the rest of us for Monday? There'll be a change in the weather this week. Showers spreading in on Tuesday. Low pressure tracking up from Central Europe, likely to dominate the weather for the rest of the week. This morning, though, fairly gloomy start for eastern counties where low clouds spread inland overnight. Central and western areas will be sunny after early mist clears. Sunshine will become more widespread as low cloud burns back to coastal regions. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, protesters making waves over the state of our polluted oceans as sewage spills double in just a year. A new release from the Royal Mint will take a closer look at a fresh 50p coin.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
You're watching Breakfast on Sky News. Plenty of news and sport to bring you throughout the course of the morning. But let's take a look at the front pages of the papers today. Rob's here to do that with us. We'll start, shall we, with the front page of The Express, which is our first story today. At least we can do. Apology to blood scandal victims is the front page of The Express there.
Yeah, that story dominating quite a few papers. The Mirror as well has it on the front page and adds that the inquiry report will shock the nation and shame ministers for failing victims.
Let's move on to the Eyes, shall we? And it talks about this revolutionary trial, an artificial intelligence trial to improve the speed and accuracy of breast cancer detection in the UK. Featuring on the front page, Rishi Sunak saying it could help millions of women across the country.
Yeah, the Financial Times is leading on Ukraine, saying G7 leaders are considering whether to push through billions of dollars of aid to the country ahead of the presidential elections.
In the Times, reporting that Labour are planning to make it easier to change the gender by allowing family doctors to sign off on the process should they get into government following the next general election, whenever that is, of course.
Yeah, and then the Metro has on its front page celebrity chef Heston Blumenthal revealing he's been diagnosed as bipolar and he's calling for a change in attitude towards neurodiverse people.
Well, that's the front pages of the papers today. Of course, Rob and I will be delving into the papers themselves, looking at all the stories coming up. We'll be joined by VV Brown, who's going to be taking a look, the singer-songwriter. That's at 6:45. New coins coming out this morning. Royal Mint unveiling this 50p coin to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Let's take a look. Well, it depicts the Allied soldiers disembarking their boats onto the beaches of Normandy with aircraft overhead. The inscription reads, D-Day, 6th of June, 1944, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword. Of course, the code names given to the beaches where the troops landed. And to mark the release, you can see here this remarkable image done by a French artist on Gold Beach, where nearly 25,000 men landed back in 1944. Meanwhile, protests against sewage in seas and rivers across Britain are growing. That's as figures show there were more than 465,000 sewage spills in England's waterways in 2023 alone. That's more than double the previous year. One of the people affected by this is the journalist Maggie Alderson, who says she lost her hearing after swimming in polluted waters in Hastings. Well, Maggie joins us now. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Tell us what happened to you.
I moved to Hastings 20 years ago, and one of the points of moving here was to be next to the sea, which is 7 minutes from my front door. And I love swimming in the sea. And during lockdown, I gathered together with some friends, and we kept swimming right through summer. And then, the cold water swimming thing was becoming fashionable, and everyone was talking about how great it was. So we carried on swimming right through winter. It was heaven, in those difficult times when we couldn't see our friends. I saw mine on the beach every morning. So it was a really joyous thing. Unfortunately, nearly 2 years ago now, I went for a swim one August morning, and I didn't realise that there'd been a sewage drop into the water. I got an ear infection in my right ear, and it caused my eardrum to perforate, which pretty much wipes out your hearing. And I had an operation on it last year to try and fix it. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So I've now got hearing aids in both ears because I am deaf because of that infection.
It's a shocking story that you tell us there, Maggie. What do you make of the water companies who say they're doing as much as they can to try and prevent sewage spills, that more investment needs to be put into, that they need to raise bills to be able to afford all of this? From your perspective, what do you make of how they're managing our waterways?
I can't see that they're making any efforts to put it right, and they're talking about raising our bills by outrageous amounts. What they need to do is stop paying outrageous amounts to their shareholders. They need to put that money into the infrastructure. And as well as the sewage off Hastings Beach, 2 weekends ago, 30,000 homes and businesses in Hastings had no water for 4 days because of Southern Water's failure to look after their own infrastructure. And that was during the busiest weekend of the year here, the May holiday, where we have a big celebration. And there were 30,000 homes and businesses without water. And we've had sewage flooding in the town centre, again caused by blocked sewers. And there's been other incidents of really serious flooding, which has pretty much wiped businesses out. Their entire stock has been wrecked by flooding. I don't think scandal is too big a word for the behaviour of Southern Water, which is the water company in the region where I live. I find it astonishing. And when you look at the figures of how much they've paid out in dividends, it's just, and also how much money that they've borrowed when water was privatised in the 1980s or the early 90s, I can't remember now. All the debts were wiped off the slates of the water companies using taxpayers' money. So they were given as these pristine businesses with no debt and yet now they have borrowed billions. And it's something has to be done at a government level to change the system. And we have the most privatized water system in the world in the UK. It's more privatized than in America, which I found astonishing when I read that. Because we always think of America as the country of privatization, but we have the most privatized water system. And that is why we're in the position we're in.
It undoubtedly won't be the end of the story, but we really appreciate you sharing yours. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us this morning from Hastings. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, we'll have more reaction to the news of the death of Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi, and we'll be speaking to the journalist and author Soraya Lenny. And of course, a busy final day in the Premier League where Liverpool said their goodbyes to one of their greatest ever managers.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's international affairs editor. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Good morning. It's 6:30. It's Monday morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast with Gareth Barlow. Let's remind you of our top stories this morning. Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi has died in a helicopter crash. Search teams found the helicopter that was carrying the president and his foreign minister in mountains in the northwest of the country. Today could be the day thousands of victims of the infected blood scandal finally get answers, as the public inquiry into the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history will publish its findings. Over 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C between 1970 and 1991. 3,000 have since died. Taiwan's new President Lai Ching-te has been officially sworn in at a ceremony in Taipei. Lai, who won the election in January, was taking over from Tsai Ing-wen, who was serving as vice president in the past 4 years. Man City have become the first team to win the Premier League 4 seasons in a row. Pep Guardiola's team beat West Ham 3-1 on the final day of the season at the Etihad. Well, let's get more on that top story, the death of Iran's president and foreign minister who died in that helicopter crash, along with everybody else on board the aircraft. Well, let's get more on that now. Bring in the journalist and author Soraya Lenny, who joins us this morning. Thank you so much for your time and for doing so. For people who aren't up to speed on Iranian politics, just tell us more about Ebrahim Raisi, if you will.
Well, Ebrahim Raisi is a mid-ranking cleric. He's the president of Iran. He has been for about 3 years now. He took over from Hassan Rouhani, who served 2 terms. He's from the conservative camp, a hardliner, if you will. His power base is the holy city of Mashhad. That's incredibly important, and that explains, in part, his rise to power. The president had the backing of the establishment, and in many ways his path to power was effectively paved for him, in that anyone who presented a challenge to the presidency was effectively moved out of the way. And the elections that were held in which he won the presidency, many would say, were engineered. Other candidates, reformers, pragmatists, conservatives, even establishment figures were effectively barred to ensure his victory. And he's been touted by many, in fact, to be in the contention to be the next supreme leader of the country, at least one of the candidates who was being mulled over, and, well, certainly not now.
You mentioned there the supreme leader, and this is important to note, isn't it, for Iran? In many countries, if the president was killed or died, that would have huge implications for politics and for the country. But with Iran, you've got Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is the supreme leader and in effect dictates much of the direction of the country, and that the president has a lesser ranking role as a result.
Yes, Iran's power structure is a little bit complicated, and it's certainly not centralised in one particular branch of government. There is power sharing. The president does control certain parts of the agenda, particularly domestic policy. However, of course, yes, there is ultimate power resides with the supreme leader. So the president dying does trigger parts of the constitution in which the first vice president takes over, and elections should be held within the next 50 days. Let's not forget also that the foreign minister was killed in this crash. So I think in the scale of things, it's actually the loss of the foreign minister that's the most important here.
You mentioned there domestic politics. Many of our viewers will, of course, been aware of the demonstrations that followed the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, a young woman who was arrested by Iran's morality police. How do you think the domestic public, Iranians, will respond to this incident? Do you think there could be more protests as a result? People will take this opportunity to make their voices heard in the hope of change?
Possibly could be a moment where it's seized upon by people, who are willing to push their own agendas or want to reignite those protests, perhaps. But no, I don't think that there's a massive risk of any instability. I think that the constitution is clear, the process is clear. Iran has a very strong state system. The establishment is very strong. It's very entrenched. And security in this establishment will inevitably prevail. But Ebrahim Raisi is a controversial figure. It's not just the protests and his handling of this or his views. I mean, the most controversial thing about Ebrahim Raisi is that he was a member of the judiciary and one of 4 judges who effectively signed off on execution warrants back in the 80s, after the revolution and during the Iran-Iraq war. Thousands of political prisoners were put to death because the Islamic Republic pretty much had them in prison and didn't know what to do with them. And he was one of the judges that signed off on those death warrants. He was part of a death commission. So this has shadowed his name ever since, and certainly during the presidency. He's not a popular figure within the country for this reason, and of course for other reasons. He's highly conservative, he's part of the hardline camp, and this goes very much against the trend of Iranian politics in the last 15 years, which has moved more reform pragmatist.
We'll follow the morning's developments really closely, but really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much. Here in the UK, the Infected Blood Inquiry is set to publish its report today on one of the biggest scandals in NHS history. Let's cross live now to our correspondent Rachel Venables, who has more on the people affected by the scandal.
More than 30,000 people in Britain were infected with serious viruses from contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. Around 3,000 of those people have lost their lives in what's been called the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. These are some of the faces of around 100 people and their families who Sky News have spoken to about how this scandal has affected and even ruined their lives. This is Jack Hewson, who died 6 years ago after being infected with hepatitis C from a transfusion in the 80s. His daughter Margaret told us it was very difficult watching him deteriorate and that her dad struggled with not being able to provide for his family and that he felt like a failure. This is Janice Whitehall, who was affected with hepatitis at birth after her mum received an infected blood transfusion during an operation. Janice says the treatment she had to receive for hep C was gruelling and left her infertile.
It makes you feel responsible for things that were beyond our control, and we feel guilty for that. But it's not our guilt because we weren't the ones that held back the information. They were. They're lying about it all. And we're the ones that feel guilty if we could have ever harmed anyone without even knowing about it. I mean, it's appalling.
Neil Weller is 53 now. He was infected around the age of 11. He says he's felt ignored for decades until only recently, and that his community has been made to feel like lepers. He says people like him were left alone to fend for ourselves when all we wanted was help and to be listened to. And this is Colin Orr. He received infected blood as a child and died in 2020. This weekend would have been his 40th birthday. His mother told us that instead of celebrating, she'd be making a wreath for her son, as it's the only thing left she can do. So these are just 4 of the 100 or so people we at Sky News have spoken to amongst the tens of thousands affected by this scandal over the decades, all of whom are hoping that today's report will give them some answers.
Rachel, thank you so much. And Sky News will, of course, have all the details on the inquiry later today. And, of course, Kay being joined by representatives of both main parties. Questions for them too. But for now, time for the sports news.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Manchester City have become the first team to win the Premier League for 4 seasons in a row. That's after a 3-1 win over West Ham. City needed a win to be sure of holding off Arsenal. Well, 2 goals from Phil Foden and this from Rodri ensured they did just that. Well, Arsenal didn't have it all their own way against Everton, who went ahead through Idrissa Gana Gueye's deflected free kick. After an equaliser, Arsenal got a late winner through Kai Havertz, but it counted for nothing in the grand scheme of things in the league. Well, it means that Pep Guardiola's side have now won 6 of the last 7 Premier League title races. Elsewhere, Liverpool ensured that Jurgen Klopp's farewell ended with a win. Alexis McAllister among the goals with a 2-1 win over Wolves. Klopp departs Anfield this summer after winning every major trophy at least once in his 8.5 years with the club, and he was given an emotional send-off. Tottenham, meanwhile, secured 5th spot and a Europa League place for the next season with a 3-0 win over Sheffield United. 2 goals from Dejan helped Spurs to the win. Chelsea, meanwhile, securing European football for the next season as Moussa Caicedo hit a stunning 50-yard goal in their 2-1 win over Bournemouth. Chelsea will provisionally play in the Europa Conference League, but will move up to the Europa League if Man City beat Man United in the FA Cup final on Saturday.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that's the sport. How about the weather? There'll be a change in the weather this week. Showers spreading in on Tuesday, low pressure tracking up from Central Europe, likely to dominate the weather for the rest of the week. This morning, though, a fairly gloomy start for eastern counties, low clouds spreading inland overnight. Central and western areas, sunny after early mist clears. Sunshine will become more widespread as low cloud burns back on coastal areas. Eastern Scotland will also brighten up as the low cloud up there also breaks. Still to come on The Breakfast Show this morning, we'll be discussing the stories making the papers today with Rob and the singer-songwriter Vivi Brown.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's international affairs editor. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
What kind of pollen gets up your nose? Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
Well, as we said just before the break, the weather stays fairly settled over the next day or so, but low pressure is moving in from the near continent. Despite the low clouds spreading inland overnight, it will burn away through Monday morning, leaving another fine day. Plenty of warm sunshine to come. Temperatures reaching 22 Celsius, that's 72 Fahrenheit. Despite the fine conditions, though, pollen levels will remain low as the main grass pollen season yet to begin and tree pollen is in decline. Nettle and docks currently prevalent.
Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
You're watching Breakfast on Sky News. We'll have our news review in a few moments' time. First, though, let's tell you what's coming up with Kay from 7. The Paymaster General, John Glenn, will be in the studio at 1:15 representing the government, whilst the Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation, Sarah Jones, joining just after 8 for Labour. Of course, Jack and Sam talking all things politics at 1:30. And at 9:15, the former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland here to talk about the infected blood inquiry. All of that to come from 7 till 10 with Kay. Time now, though, for our news review. Rob's here, of course. We're also pleased to say we're joined by the singer-songwriter Vivi Brown. Thank you so much for coming in on a Monday morning. Appreciate it. You've been both taking a look through the papers. You're starting with the Eye, first and foremost.
Yes. I've had a really good read through, and one of the things that really caught my eye this morning was to do with the breast cancer research and AI technology. And I was reading through it, and it really is fascinating when you read through the sort of potential that it has to make a massive difference for women with breast cancer. And I was just reading through facts about the statistics on how there's been 80%, or they did a study of 80,000 women, did a study, and 20% had higher detection due to AI technology. So it's a really positive thing, AI. It's a really exciting time that we're in, that it can help so much, especially within the NHS, which is a subject matter, that is kind of under scrutiny at the moment. But, there's a lot of questions to be raised about that technology, with there's an existential crisis going on with AI about, how it can help, but also how it is a little bit, or we could question whether it's dangerous or not. But, reading it, it's great technology for helping women. I'm a woman, and I've done breast cancer testing over the years. And when I see things like this, especially as someone who has experienced losing family members to breast cancer, this can only be a positive thing when we're reading this kind of thing in the news.
Adds to that mosaic of diagnostics and treatments and just, the Prime Minister heralding it this morning.
I think when it comes to pressure on the NHS and public services, one of the big challenges for whoever wins the next election is how do you try and kind of get more out of a similar amount of money that's going into the NHS? And I think one of the big answers is AI, because it could just massively increase productivity.
Yes.
Instead of having someone sitting down and having to look at a scan, you could potentially get AI to do it more accurately and quicker as well. So, a big possible development.
Yeah, there's real efficiency, I think, because we're dealing with algorithms, we're dealing with mathematical certainties, and we're also taking the pressure of having people do it, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, but because there is so much pressure on the NHS at the moment, something like this can only be a positive thing. But
as long as you get buy-in from patients, isn't it? I remember when my dad had an op and he had the kind of choice about whether he wanted a robot to do it or a sort of robot arm controlled by a consultant or a surgeon. And he sort of thought, I think I'd rather have a human being do it. So I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? It's kind of take people with you and earn their trust.
Absolutely. I think it's going to become more normalised. I think the next generation this is going to be the way forward. This is going to be the new normal. And soon, AI, it's happening now. It's going to be a massive part of our lives. And why not start by helping people and using it to help save lives?
I'm sure we'll hear more from the government on that one. We will also hear more from the government if inflation hits 2%. They will be out with their panpipes and fanfares.
Yeah, I think this could be...
Not panpipes, that would be a weird one, wouldn't it?
That would be something interesting. I think this is possibly where the big story goes later in the week. Obviously, the first couple of days, I think, will be dominated quite rightly by the results of the infected blood inquiry. But then on Wednesday, we get some big figures from the Office for National Statistics around inflation, the rate at which prices are going up. And a lot of analysts expect it to come back down to 2%, possibly 2%, possibly just over 2.1%. Mainly driven, I think you will hear government trying to say, we've done this, what the steps we took meant that it's come down. Maybe something to that, a little bit anyway. The main driver of it, though, I think, has been energy costs and the cap, the Ofgem regulated cap coming down 12%. Forcing down the overall rate of inflation. And international energy costs coming down as well. There's only so much that the government and Ofgem can really take responsibility for, can't they? Yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of get this weird sort of thing where you go back a year or so and you have the government blaming the international situation for high inflation, but now inflation has come back down to 2%. They're saying, well, that was all of us. That was not the international situation. But I think this is the reason why you're still likely to get an election later in the year, I think, because you have sort of GDP economic growth that came in better than expected last week, this coming down to 2%. What might follow is the Bank of England bringing down interest rates, which means that mortgage rates start to come down a little bit as well. I guess the open question is whether it's all enough to try and kind of turn the tide or do enough to help the Conservatives out of the dire position they're in right now.
It's wanting to know where we stand. I know with the mortgage rates and everything, we're looking to buy a house at the moment, and it's just knowing when it is a time to make the right decisions. And, you know, as a family, I have a young family, you know, hearing things like this is all interesting, and you take in that information. But, yeah, it's just wanting to have some kind of predictable, you know, knowing what's happening next for families so they can make decisions.
Feeling better off, isn't it? Like, you can read these numbers, but if you're still not feeling better off, then it might be a bit meaningless, especially when it comes to an election.
And then when it comes to things like the house buying, lots of people are going, well, is there going to be a little kind of cherry on the top from the government ahead of the election? Is there going to be a stamp duty, something? Or what?
Yes.
And so, again,
caveats,
it comes down, again, like you say, to being able to plan.
Exactly.
I think lots of people will probably say they've not felt as though they've been able to do that for
a long time. It's been very chaotic, for sure.
Talk to me about this story, if you will, Vivi, on the front page of the Telegraph.
Oh, well, I think we're talking about pay for disruption. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I believe in the power of protest. I think it's really important that we do not get in the way of the democratic right to protest. I know that there's been a lot of conversations with the new public order bill and the restrictions of protest activities. But I think that when it starts to get in the way of situations such as a woman needing to get to the hospital for her child who is poorly, or an ambulance, for instance, trying to get through traffic, I do think that there does need to be some consequences with this, and perhaps the idea of pay for disruption is something that needs to be put in place.
So this is suggesting that groups such as Just Stop Oil are forced to pay compensation for people, like you say, who are inconvenienced by their actions. I guess where's the threshold? That's going to be the challenge, isn't it?
It's really difficult. And what's the infrastructure? What's the legislation that's going to come with it? How far, how much are you going to fine that person for doing that? Like, you know, as well as trying your hardest to make sure that we keep the power of protest and the democratic right to say how you feel alive. So it's going to be about balance. And I do hope that this isn't going to be a way for the Conservatives to weaponise the power of protest and put something in. But there needs to be something put in place, because when you do hear stories where people are genuinely just trying to live their daily lives and are being disrupted, it's just totally not fair and not right. Yeah.
We've not got a huge amount of time, so I'm going to fast forward all the way to paper 6, which we never normally do. But I know that you are both particularly interested to talk about cheese this morning.
Yes.
So this is page 3 of the Times.
Yeah, apparently supermarkets are reporting a big surge in demand for kind of posh, smelly, strong cheese.
And the name is brilliant.
Well, they've gone through a few in the Times here. There's a cheese here called Minger. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Let's hope so.
Which is apparently Scottish, smelly, soft, washed rind cheese, and it could be a real dinner party conversation starter.
Oh, I
I'd say I've never heard of that one before. I'm not a kind of cheddar man myself.
No, and then we were talking about the whole revolution of cottage cheese, weren't we, just before?
The cottage cheese revolution?
Yes. So on TikTok, the whole thing at the moment is cottage cheese has become this new thing where people are turning cottage cheese into, like, types of breads and... you know, all this amazing... I'm totally on board with it. I'm on board the cottage cheese revolution.
I used to work with somebody who used to take cottage cheese on the aircraft, but then they used to take it off them because it was liquid. So she would freeze her cottage cheese at home, take it through security as a solid, and then eat it on the plane once it thawed out. I'm like, she was only going to Ireland. There's cottage cheese in Ireland. I didn't like to tell her. We've got to stop there on that anecdote. Vivi, Rob, thank you so much. Kay's here. We've got all the news, all the situation on Iran too. Do stay with us.